Welcome. Good morning, everybody. At least it's morning here in Seattle. My name is Kelly Kerner, and this is a little taste test is how I've been thinking about it, like a open house or a way to show people what we've been doing in the learning community. And I've structured it in such a way where I'm hoping that you will get some immediately useful material that you can, use wherever you want, really, and so that it'll be worth your time. And that's pretty much the way that we approach most things in the learning community. It's really very practical. And so let me tell you, because I'm recognizing some people's names that I know I've had a chance to meet you at some point or seen your posts on various lists. But for those of you who I haven't got to meet, my name is Kelly Kerner. I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm up here in Seattle, Washington. And I had the luck, good fortune, serendipity, to be at the University of Washington for graduate school. And so I had Marcia Linehan as one of my clinical supervisors. And while she was writing her DBT treatment manuals, and so just through luck, ended up being in an early stage of the development and research on dialectical behavior therapy, ended up training research therapists, being a research therapist, and then, founding Behavioral Tech and working as its CEO for many years, and then more recently have moved off to be able to do more experimental stuff like this, stuff that I can be able to be very creative and do lower cost types of trainings and really experiment with different ways that help support DBT therapists. So I'm very excited. I was saying earlier, it feels a little bit like having my in-laws over to my house, like it's an open house, and so I do feel a little nervous, more nervous than I might usually, but welcome. It's I'm really looking forward to kind of showing you guys what we do in the learning community. So let me just show you what the learning, just a quick thing. The learning community is meant for experienced DBT therapists. So today I'm going to try and give you a taste about the level at which we mostly teach. And it's really, the whole format of it is meant to help you develop expertise. So it's not to teach the basics, it's really to kind of raise your game and help you be able to apply what you know with more and more skill across more and more cases. And it also is a participatory, so it's not just me, teaching like from the top down. There's a lot of talent and skill amongst the group. It's a very experienced group. And so there's a willingness to help each other learn as well and give feedback. So we focused this year on 3 themes, and this is what we'll be doing in the upcoming one as well, the next one that starts. And so let me tell you just a little bit about that, then I want to show you some of the stuff, and then I want to do a little bit of teaching that's very representative. That's what we've done on emotion vulnerability and on dissociation, so that's the plan. So what we've been focusing on in the learning community are 3 themes. The first is fidelity with stage 1 cases. This is sort of the ability to know your stuff, like really know the treatment, and be able to show that you know the treatment. And we've done some really, I'll show you in just a second, we have this nifty worksheet that we made to help people who are preparing for certification, and so I'll show you that in just a sec. So that's the first emphasis, just to get everybody on the same page, make sure we all have kind of a good solid base about the concepts. And then we move into working on resolving lack of progress, and I'll show you some of the stuff that we're doing on that now because it's really fun. But the idea is that with people who have complicated problems like the folks who end up receiving dialectical behavior therapy, that lack of progress is the norm. You run into all kinds of problems where your treatment as usual doesn't go the way you had hoped, and you have to be able to think your way through what is in the way, what do I need to do different, what do I have to get going so that this person can make the changes that we're both hoping for. So I want to talk about that because from my perspective, that is where case formulation and treatment planning is like a day-to-day sort of event. I want to show you sort of how I think about that, and that leads into the mini treatment plan stuff. And then the last theme for the learning community has to do with moving from stage 1 to what I think of as like 1.5 too, because after you get stabilization, like DBT is very structured in year 1 in stage 1. You get the person's out-of-control behavior in control. But then after that, there's still, for a lot of our folks, significant misery and this quality of living being traumatic because of the exquisite sensitivity that continues. And so how do you start to work with that? How do you target and do treatment planning for that? So those are the themes that we're working on in the learning community. And I just want to show you a little bit about this. Let me show you the worksheet. Is this pace okay? You guys can hear me all right? And just check real quick here that sounds good. Good. Okay, good. Thank you for that feedback. Good to get that. So let me show you this case formulation template. So how many of you, are any of you guys thinking about doing the Linehan board certification process? That is, it turned out that a lot of the people who I am involved with were interested in that, and they were finding it difficult to figure out, okay, like what does a case formulation really need to work on, and how much does it, you know, what does it have to look like and stuff like that. So myself and Catherine Patrick, who's co-leading with me this year, just created a nice little template. And so I'm just going to show you this just so you can see the kinds of things we do to help each other out. You can read this instruction here if you want. What we did was we took a really nice template from Kate Comtois and Sarah Landis with their permission and adapted it so that we wove in the narrative stuff that the certification people are asking for, and then we plugged in the text references. So I'm going to just scroll ahead here for a second. But like, you know, where in the book do you go to look up biosocial theory? Just to refresh yourself while you're writing up your formulation and your case formulation for something like certification. So we went through and did that, so it was easy to use this whole exercise of creating a formulation as a way to strengthen your skills and refresh your knowledge and that sort of thing. So that's one of the big emphasis in the learning community first, just to get so that you know your stuff and you can show you know your stuff in a format like that, and so you can feel confident. And then the other thing that we've been doing is Alan Frizzetti and this guy Mike Worrell, the former student of Alan's, but now is at, I think he's up in Alaska as a professor. Anyway, they gave us the permission to use this neat coding system. So the other part of fidelity and treatment planning is it really helps to be able to see how other people do DBT and actually try to label the strategies yourself. So we've been doing coding because, again, the certification requires that you submit tapes that'll be coded for adherence, and that is scary if you've never done tape coding. So that's what we've been doing with the fidelity, this sort of structured case formulation, helping people really know their stuff, and then doing some tape coding. That makes sense. And then the other thing I wanted to say just here is that case formulation often feels like a hoop, at least for me anyway. When I hear the word, you know, write a case formulation, my eyes glaze over. Because it's like you do this big old chunk of work that takes you forever. You avoid it forever, and then you finally do it, and then you know, and then you put it in the file, and you never look at it again. At least that's how case formulation has been for me historically until I've kind of moved to this other, which is it's a case formulation. Actually, let me go into the definition, but this is what we've been working on. This is how I would define case formulation. And you'll see on your slides that I scratched through a way to organize complex information to say instead it's the skills to organize complex information. And you take the information you have, you put it into a format of like hypotheses about the causes, precipitants, maintaining influences of whatever the person's difficulties are, so that you can then make a blueprint to guide individualized treatment. In other words, how do you make DBT fit for this specific person? And so, or whatever treatment, not just DBT, could be CBT, could be anything. Okay, so case formulation, when I think of it first, I think of it as big old static, daunting document that I'm going to write. The way I've moved to it now is much more, it's a set of skills that helps you think through the very persistent fact that progress isn't linear. It doesn't go as smoothly with folks who have very complicated problems. So you have to be able to constantly organize new information into a usable format, sort out what is most relevant, and then figure out how that's actionable. What are you going to do about it? And that skill set is what we've been working on building. So this is how I tend to teach it, how I help people build up to a case formulation. So look here at the bottom down at the chain analysis. Again, I'm going to go kind of at the level that I would go in the learning community because it's for experienced therapists. If some of the stuff is new to you, then that will help you sort out, oh, okay, that's a new idea. I'd have to do a little spooling up to get up to speed. But just look down here at the chain analysis. For those of you who are familiar with that, it's a method of being able to take a targeted behavior, specific instance of it, and then look at the controlling variables. So if you took, say you have a person who has life-threatening behavior, and they have both non-suicidal self-injury and they have suicide attempts, but some of their non-suicidal self-injury has actually been very serious. And so what if you took chain analyses of multiple instances of that? That's typically how you might start to understand what is going on, what sets this off, why does it keep going, what maintains it, how does this work in the person's life, stuff like that. And then you would, this lets me weave in one of the questions I got asked. Somebody asked, when you have a new person who starts and it's very chaotic, how do you start to conceptualize even at that moment? The way I like to do it is I really, very early, first session, like to get the suicide history and history of non-suicidal self-injury, and I tend to ask for the most recent incident, the most serious incident, and the very first time. I find sometimes the historical factors that led to the very first instance of self-harm or serious suicide attempt can be really informative about sort of early learning that's influencing current day. So if you did that, if you did chain analysis across specific instances, you could then start to look for patterns across time and get up to what I would talk about as behavioral analysis. This is where you're looking at classes of behavior. And so you might find that 3 out of the 4 instances of self-harm were about regulating emotion. The person had this incredible angsty, like they couldn't stand to be in their own skin, and cutting relieved that sense of pressure. So it was primarily to regulate a physiological state that they just felt they couldn't stand. But then you might look across and see that there's this other instance, the most serious instance, say, that was more about showing, like communicating, I can't stand this, to somebody else. It wasn't primarily about emotion regulation, it was more about communicating. And so the function of that behavior is different. Does that make sense? So you go from the specific up to a kind of more mid-level pattern. And then once you've got that, if you take that across other targets, so what does it look like in session when a person can't stand it, say, it could be that what you start to see across time is that really helping the person decide to stay without escaping might be your overall quick and dirty way of formulating, kind of across problems. That might be the theme that would help you link these together. Does that make sense? There could be very specific skill deficits that go across problems. So to build a case formulation, this is the method that I've been teaching that I suggest. It goes from chain analysis up to classes of behavior, looking for patterns, and then linking across those, you start to see how things hang together. Okay, so again, I'm going to pause here, see how that's going for you guys. Okay, good deal. Looks like people are following. Thank you guys for the feedback. It's really helpful to be able to do that, just to see how you guys are hanging in there. Feel free to type in questions at any point, and I'll come back to those. Okay, so what you end up with, if you end up doing this like this, is this kind of case formulation, is it lets you look across multiple problems and then see what is common across those problems and across time, and therefore be way more precise in what you target. So this is the idea of treating common links that are occurring across time and across targets. So let me just walk you through a super quick example here. So here are two chain analyses, okay? This one here, if you look at the one for withdrawing in session, let's say that this person has this therapy interfering behavior where they pull back in session in a way that defeats your ability to say they're in crisis, you say the wrong thing, it's invalidating, you don't seem to get it, whatever it is, the cue, maybe we're not quite clear yet. They pull back, and then you end up not being able to help them head off whatever is blooming crisis. So say that's one of the targets that you have. You want to help them not withdraw and shut down the session. And then let's say, too, that they've had some serious overdoses, and you have the chain analyses of past instances of that. If you lay these out, and I tend to do this just quickly on the back of a napkin or a piece of, my favorite is envelopes, because before they're recycled, you know, just very informally, not in a fancy, daunting way, but just what do you know sort of way. If you did that, what you might start to see are these patterns. So I've made these kind of purpley ones. In both of these instances, leading up to these different target behaviors, active passivity showed up, a secondary target of active passivity. I'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. But and then also this intense sense of loneliness surged for the person. And then the other thing that's common across these is that the demands, like I, as a therapist, let up a little bit on how much I'm asking for in the session. And after the overdose, there was a reduced demands from the environment. So looking across these, and if this, let's just say that this actually started to really look like a pattern that held up across time and targets, what you'd want to do is probably start to really target these specific links. And if you could do that, if you could get change in these, then it would ripple across all problems. That concept makes sense? So you're really trying to identify common links and then treat those, and this is where I get to the idea of a mini treatment plan, because really for just this case example we were just talking about, like for this person, what I need is for that little link of this intense physical agitation that leads to this sort of non-suicidal self-injury that's about regulating emotion, I need a little mini treatment plan of how do I actually help the person treat that. And then for the active passivity, like I need a treatment plan of how do I treat that. And I need one for when intense loneliness surges, how do I treat that. Does that make sense? So this gist of sort of treatment planning, you can think of case formulation and treatment planning as this big old whopping document that gets put in the chart that you never look at again. Or, the way I prefer, it's case formulation treatment planning is the kind of nitty-gritty day-to-day stuff where you are identifying in your smartest way what should you target, and then how do you most efficiently treat that. And I almost feel like it's like a set of Rolodex. You guys probably, people don't even remember what a Rolodex is. Some of you are old enough to remember a Rolodex. Remember that? It's like there's a set of different like mini recipes, mini treatment plans to treat these links. Okay, so then there's a quick question coming in here. When I say reduce demands by the therapist, is that something you need to be cognizant of so we're not reinforcing avoidance? Exactly. So let's just go back real quick for this. So if I saw reduced demands, actually no, we're going to get to this in both the examples for treating dissociation, because that often produces reduced demands, and for emotion vulnerability. So let me hang on to that and I'll come back to it, because yes, you definitely want to provide enough help so that the person can approach, but you want to do it in a way where you're not inadvertently reinforcing withdrawing, that there may be other ways for the person to get through the situation and build up their capacity to be with difficult situations without escaping in that kind of a way. Good question, Jody. Okay, so now, this idea of a mini treatment plan makes sense to you guys? Common links, mini treatment plans? That's where we're working. And I'll pause again, see if folks are doing okay, pacing, timing, etc. Questions that are coming up? There's a little chat area you can send in questions. All right. So these mini plans, I think of them as mini formulations, mini treatment plans. They are very common among the folks who end up being in DBT. There's some very common patterns that show up, and for which I would say we all need our little, it's like a little subroutine. It's a little mini treatment plan, a little mini formulation about when this happens, how do I understand it, and what do we want to do about it, so that you can talk with your patient about it in a way that generates collaboration and goals for new behavior. So the secondary targets, the dialectical dilemmas that Linehan has written about, those are ones where I think it's really helpful to have your little mini treatment plan in your mind, because when it comes up, you're going to have to work on it. So I want to do emotion vulnerability in a moment, just to show kind of what I mean here. But, you know, the idea with secondary targets is anybody who has a history of invalidating environments and a certain type of predisposition to be dysregulated pervasively, you know, that mix that comes out of the biosocial theory, anybody who has that, as they go through life, through all of the developmental stuff that they're going to have, they're going to develop coping strategies. Sort of, I think of these as like the fallout of being a person who has pervasive emotion dysregulation. Like when you ask for help, how do you learn to do that, given that you are so exquisitely sensitive and things set you off and it takes you forever to come down, and et cetera. So when you're a person like that, when you're that sensitive, you do your best you can, but you develop, I think, these secondary targets as just ways you've learned to cope. And so I think it's good to have little mini treatment plans for these because they show up a lot. So does dissociation for a lot of our folks. And so that's why I picked those two. I'm seeing another question come in. Am I talking about distinguishing between respondent from operant behavior? I might talk a little bit about that, but it lets me make a point. In the learning community, so my background is as more of a radical behaviorist, to somebody who's very much trained in behaviorism straight up. And I know most people actually are not as familiar with that. Some of the types of thinking that you need to be able to figure out what to do, especially when there's lack of progress, it really helps if you're strong on behaviorism. And so Yasmin's question is a very good one. Like being able to make this distinction between how much might a behavior be driven as a way to just classically conditioned, like Pavlov's dog. When the cue comes, the brain escapes. So dissociation, I think, is a very good example of that type of problem. In other times, what really maintains a behavior is more the consequence. You can't always separate these out so cleanly, but sometimes it's more of the consequence. It works as communication. And if that's the case, it would drive you toward a different treatment plan. So being able to be fluid with behavioral concepts and think those through is really, I think it gives you a lot more muscle to be able to help people. And so we bring that, I definitely bring that in, but it's not like heavy-handed, like you guys don't have to become behaviorists, but it's cool if you can build your skills in this way. It's a good question, Yasmin. Okay, so now mini treatment plans. Are you guys all, I'm hoping that this is okay. I typically would be having more back and forth, but since it's an open house, I figure I should kind of keep your pace up, yeah, and so we can get to some questions. Okay, well, thumbs up, thumbs down on speed. Let's see what kind of feedback you give me here. So here is the gist of a mini treatment plan, okay? And I want to show you some of these that people have been doing in our community, but I just want to, so one of the things that often comes up is that we don't understand why therapy is not going better. You know, like there's some lack of progress, and we have, one of the things I've been teaching is there's a sort of systematic way to take a look at why are things not going better and what has got us stuck. And I like to do that in a format where I get my own thinking together, but then I'm prepping to be able to discuss it with my patient and discuss it with my teammates or a consultant. And so this gets to the idea of mini treatment plans and mini formulations. And so there's just this is just a little template that we've been working with, but I'm gonna model for you how I might do it, okay, just so you can see. So what I would typically lead off with is something along the lines of, you know, I've been thinking about you. And I think all of my patients now slightly tense and know something good is coming when I say that. But I usually say, okay, so, you know, I've been thinking about you. And I've been thinking about this pattern that I want to run by you to see if I'm really understanding it. And then I hop up to the whiteboard, or I have a piece of paper where I've already drawn it out, depending on who my person is. And then I just go through a mini formulation with them so that they can correct it and we can make sure that I'm getting it. So I would say it seems like there's a certain set of things that happen. I might be talking about in session, I might be talking about outside of session, that set off, and then whatever is the problem that I want to talk about. So say it is withdrawing in session. It seems like they're different. I can't tell if it's my tone of voice, a certain line of questioning, if it pulls for emotion, something I'd like to understand better, but something I do ends up setting off this subtle way that you start to withdraw, and then before we know it, you're actually dissociated, and then in a way that neither of us want, the whole rest of the session may be gone, and you don't get the help you need, and then all hell breaks loose outside because we didn't solve a problem that was really on your mind. Do you know what I'm talking about? And I'm looking for the head nod, right? So I'm trying to describe it in a non-judgmental way, in a visual way, and in a way that promotes our conversation and increased clarity. And so I'm trying to, if we think back about that behavioral analysis level, I'm somewhere between chain analysis and behavioral analysis here, and I might even go across problems if that's the case. So it could be I'm talking here about a common link, and then dissociation is set off here at the little X, and that leads to the types of ways that you have unprotected sex, the types of ways you end up doing binge drinking, the types of ways you end up really with very serious self-injury, the types of ways blah, blah, blah. So I'm having a conversation where I'm linking this common problem to other things, and then I'm going to start to talk about, once I've got the head nod and we've cleared up what the pattern is, then I'm going to start to lay out what we should do about it. What would be the replacement behavior that I'm asking for? What do I want to see instead? And how will we rehearse that? Like, what are the specific steps of pulling off that new alternative behavior? And sometimes, so that's kind of a little bit more skills, like every time something shows up, the person is doing something different. But sometimes there's more involved change procedures that are needed, things that I'll have to lead in session or that'll be more structured and longer over time. So that's the gist of a mini treatment plan, right? So what I've done is I've chosen not at the big old whopping, you know, case formulation of DBT for borderline personality disorder, but down into the more nitty-gritty, this particular link that's common across multiple problems seems to be set off by this sort of thing, leads to that sort of thing. Here's the alternative, and here's how we'll get you the alternative. How does that sound? So case formulation and treatment planning becomes a shared activity. So let me show you. I'm hoping that that's kind of making sense as we're talking about it. I bet you anything this is a lot of how you guys work, but it might, for some of you guys, it might help distill it, perhaps, in a way. So let me show you some of the cool stuff that's coming out of the learning community. So here's an example. what we've been doing lately is people have been targeting lack of progress and really figuring out how to discuss lack of progress with their patients. And so these are some examples of what has been done. So can you see this? This is a picture of somebody's whiteboard that they did. You can see that their art skills are like mine. I only have stick figures, you know, and but they're having this conversation with their person and slowly but surely building this up so that their alternative behavior is learn to float, right? And what does that then turn into? A set of specific skills, like that, yeah? And then let me show you this other, there's some very good ones here. This one, it's another cool one. Old rules prison, heading instead to freedom field. I just love these types of things. People are so creative. And then there are, I have another couple. Let me see if I can quickly upload for you all this one other one that I really loved. It's this one. See if this will upload. So what's ending up happening is you do this with your patient, and the feedback that people are giving is that people take the pieces of paper or the screenshot, people take a picture of what they've done on the whiteboard, they take it with them on vacation. But that shared conversation ends up increasing clarity, increasing commitment, increasing collaboration about this. Let me just see if my last one, oh, yes it did. Here's this other cool one. Isn't that cool? So this is something that was drawn by the therapist, you know, and if you're building it, like this is a whole long session worth of drawing together and thinking together, but they've kind of got all their stuff. I think this is the one that the person took with them on vacation. But it ends up being, so I think of this as formulation. This is formulation and treatment planning at the nitty-gritty level that allows you to have the type of conversation you need to have with your patient, I think. There's similar ways where you need to do this with your team to be able to have them get out to the edge of your own thinking. And so that's the other, and especially in the lack of progress cases, strengthening your own ability to ask for a consultation and be clear with your consultation requests is another set of skills we're practicing in learning communities. Okay, how's that? You guys doing okay? So I will move on now to just straight up teaching, just so you can see how I am as I guess you've been seeing how I am as a teacher, but this is kind of how I might teach one of the mini treatment plans. So the way we've been doing it is I've been doing some modeling, like, okay, here's my version of a mini treatment plan. It's not like it's gospel or something. Anybody can create a mini treatment plan. And so you guys could, and you should. I think we've given you this. I might switch. Yeah, can you see this okay? If that's too small, what you can do, there's a little expand your screen to full screen that you can use. Can you do that? But this is a little mini treatment plan for dissociation. And I want to have you have a chance to kind of read this. But again, just a model, I might say to my patient, you know, it seems like there's this pattern where your brain escapes. And I think it's, I mean, many people who've had the kind of experiences that you've had that are completely overwhelming of their system end up with this type of a response. It's like a physiological response that's often develops out of our awareness, out of our control. The brain just escapes, right? And so we might have some conversation about that. But it seems like, and then I would say, put the cues up, it seems like this is when it happens. This is what sets it off. Might be associated with intense emotions. And then for that specific person, I would describe exactly what are the, you know, what does dissociation look like? Because it looks really different for different people. Some people, it's way more, yeah, so actually, people can do this in a lot of different ways, I guess. So what you want, the idea with a mini formulation, why I'm pausing here is what you want always with a mini formulation is you're tying this kind of general body of knowledge to the specific person so that you and they can get the grip of it, because often the big picture stuff isn't tailored enough to the person. So like for your particular person, when is dissociation good? Like it's way better than the alternative, versus when is dissociation really problematic and you want it to change. You're going to have to go back and forth to find that sweet spot, because you don't want to like rip away a person's major coping strategy, you know, and block them from it. So there's this sweet spot and a genuine collaboration that you're going for by doing these sort of mini formulations. So you want to lay that out exactly, like here's what it looks like in session, I think, am I getting it? Is that what you noticed too? Here's what I think happens outside of session, something like that. And then you want to start to describe the problems, like the inability to maintain attention, to tolerate emotion, to regulate emotion that are related to that happening. And then go in a very concrete way with how that works for them. So for most people, it reduces emotional distress, right? For some people, there's the additional, this gets to the earlier comment, caring, warmth, removal of demands from the environment. And having the consequence of caring, warmth, removal of demands from the environment isn't necessarily bad. It's just bad if it doesn't work for the person. In other words, if it inadvertently strengthens escape without also strengthening approach. You know what I mean? So the behavioral rehearsal, the replacement behaviors, if I was talking with my person in session, I might say, you know, what I really want to work on in session, because of the way dissociation is linked to all these problematic things out in your life, in session, what I'd really like to work on is catching it early. So we know that there's certain cues that I could bring up that would end up really putting you on that path, right? The way that you start to not have eye contact, you start to breathe more shallowly, you start to go inward, things start to feel unreal, stuff like that. As soon as either of us know it, we would really work on being able to become more aware of it's happening, aware of what was the cue right before it, plan, cope ahead, distraction, etc. So you bring in all of the skills that are related that could be useful and practice them. And the way that I like to do behavioral rehearsal with dissociation is actually to set up practices every session. Okay, so we know these types of cues are the hardest. So let's start, like just an exposure hierarchy, let's start with a littler one, try it. Okay, try the skills we talked about, the plan we made. Okay, fantastic. And then move into our regular session agenda. So that the person is kind of constantly rehearsing, how do you ground, how do you control your attention, how do you, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense? Okay. Sometimes, and this is part of what I was just talking about, you really want to do change procedures. It's not enough to have the person kind of out there on their own just doing their best with skills. You want to set up something that's more formal, like what I was just talking about, with informal or formal exposure to cues to help the person practice how they're going to handle things like the earliest signs of dissociation. And then the other thing is, sometimes with dissociation, you really want to work on removing the cue. In other words, like I had a person where there were certain TV programs that always led to dissociation. It was just too painful. It was too point blank. And so for her, especially during the time period where we're really working on getting non-suicidal self-injury down, we agreed she simply wouldn't. There was a certain rating she had to do before she would turn on the TV. And if she was kind of above a 5 on this rating scale, which it was a kind of complicated one for her, but it was like, you know, can I or can't I take it? A sort of insult of being hit by a cue that I'm not anticipating. This is our cope ahead plan. If she rated that above a 5, like she was too high, then she didn't watch TV that night. So sometimes it's really smart to remove a cue, especially when dissociation is associated with really risky things, right? We might in session agree we're not going to talk about certain things for some period of time until we really build up our skills with easier things. So removing the cue is totally fine, and it's back to this kind of collaborative goal setting. And then the other, just to get to this contingency management, this gets to the removal of demands. So to the extent that dissociation becomes a way that the environment removes demands and the person stays trapped in this spiral of never actually coming back and acquiring the skill to handle it and then move through it, in that situation, I might be very explicit with my person of how that is playing out. And therefore, what I'd like to do in session is, when they dissociate, help them get grounded again, return to the topic that we were just on, and have them do some little bit so that they're not, the behavior is not working to escape. They can't help it, their brain escapes, and then we come back and we do the thing that was just avoided. Even if it's a little, it's like if you're scared of a horse, you get thrown off. You know, you at least, even if you're not getting back up on it, you're at least walking back over to the person, and maybe even in your imagination, imagine it's the person, the horse, imagination getting back on the horse or patting the horse or doing something like that. So you want to end, contingency management is about making sure that the right thing is reinforced, and in this case we want to approach is what we want to reinforce. So let me pause there. Questions, thoughts, ideas about this? Based on your particular person, the details you would end up putting in here, the specific skills, the exact replacement behavior you might want, all of this is going to get nailed down to a pretty specific level so that the patient is nodding his or her head. So what do you think about that? You guys have ideas about or questions that come up for you about treating dissociation around this? Pause here and let you say any of those. While people are typing that question, I also want to share, you'll see this come through from me in your chat window there. There's a really nice scale, dissociative experiences scale. I'll send this out to you in a link after the fact too. But this is a really nice scale. It has scoring norms, so you can sort of see, you know, what the different, what's associated with different disorders. And then the other cool thing about it is it lets you, like there may be a specific item that really fits for your person, and you guys can use that to track if the person fills out that dissociative experiences scale over time. You can see if that process is moving. So I'll send this out afterwards, but if you want to take a look, you can just look up dissociative experiences scale to Google that and you'd find it. Okay, so here's some good questions coming in. What strategies do you use in session to help them ground? I bet you anything, you probably use all the same ones that I do. They all have to do with focusing attention externally. And so one of my favorites is actually to do therapy standing on a balance board. So it's very hard to dissociate if you're trying to balance on one of those boards that kind of moves around. I've done whole sessions balancing on one foot. Both of us stand up and we have whatever the difficult conversation is with a little bit more attention like that. I really, really like to move the person out of the posture into something that's more active and engaged, and then work our way back to being able to sit down and have a conversation. But things like that, I think, you know, there's always ways to, I don't know if that's enough there, Bridget, to sort of address it, but attending, counting the colors that are outside, creating strong physical sensations. I've done sessions doing a wall sit against the wall, stuff like that. See, do you always target dissociation? It could be argued that sometimes dissociation is not maladaptive, depending on the function. That's exactly. So I really would make the case that it's a collaborative conversation between you and your person. And you're deciding, how does dissociation get in the way? And would it make sense for it to be a goal? For sure in session. Like if I have a person where they check out whether it's that they experience that as switching to an alter or they just disengage and they have a sense of derealization, depersonalization. If that means that then they and I cannot solve whatever is the life problem because it keeps happening in session, then I want that targeted enough that they can get the benefit that they need so that we can solve whatever the problem is. But the way in which we would approach it, I could imagine a lot of different ways. And so that's really exactly what I'm talking about, is not to assume, but rather to assess and then come up with what is the replacement behavior that makes sense for them. That's the next step. Okay. All right, good. Good deal, you guys. Yeah, so then let's move to the next little mini treatment plan, if that's okay with you. I think what I'll do too, I have these little mini treatment plans as PDF, and that's a little easier for you to see than the slide deck that you got sent for this. So I'll send that to you guys in a little post follow-up. Okay. Yeah, so thank you. A question came in too about Cymbalta. Yeah, there may be different medications or drugs or practices. I once had a client who would stare into a mirror because she was checking different imperfections on her skin, and just that act of staring into the mirror will make all, like if you want to trigger dissociation or depersonalization, that's a great derealization, that's a great way to do it. And so with all of these things, if you have something that you think is part of the cue that sets off dissociation, you'll be talking through with the patient, how do we want to handle that? Regardless of what is setting it off, how do we want to respond when this happens in a way that makes it be less problematic in your life? So do you want to experiment with trying something other than Cymbalta? Yes, no, etc. So it's all about that. It's really about having this collaborative treatment planning conversation and formulating the problem together. Okay. Thanks, you guys, for these great questions. Cool. So let me show you the next one. Yeah. Again, if this is small, you can expand the little window there at the bottom. You see that, where you can maximize the screen, full screen view, and that'll let you see it a little bit better. Okay. So emotion vulnerability. What I want to say about this is it's unfortunate that Linehan uses emotion vulnerability in two ways. So there's the concept in the biosocial theory of being vulnerable to dysregulation, right, where or to emotion, where cues, low-level cues set you off, you go higher than kind of most people, and that takes you longer to come down to baseline. So there's that way. But then there's also the way it's defined as the secondary target of emotion vulnerability. So that one is more about living, a kind of chronic experience of living with pervasive emotion dysregulation, the ways in which you will always be a sensitive person, and the tragedy of that, really. This is when our people say to us, you don't understand, unless you are wired like this yourself, or you have some other medical condition or life circumstance that lets you really get it, most of us actually don't get this part. It's this exquisite sensitivity, this sort of temperamental wiring that can be for some of our folks. But the other, sometimes you live in an environment that has sensitized you. So like some of the guys I've worked with where they're super sensitive to disrespect, the way in which danger has made you be so vigilant to certain types of cues where you go 0 to 100 in a minute. And then because you have that reactivity, you end up engaging in behaviors or failing to engage in behaviors that create disaster. So like there's this wake of tragedy where it's like you're the agent of your own demise. It's just this exquisitely painful thing to live with. Everybody else is just tromping up the hill, and you have a 180-pound pack, and things really are harder, and other people don't seem to cut you any slack because of it. So this sort of lived experience of being a person with pervasive emotion dysregulation this is part of what is meant by that secondary target of emotion vulnerability. And it really can create a just this exquisite pain that I will always be this way. I will always lose. Things will never work out for me. A certain type of like despair. And my co-teacher, Catherine Patrick, had a great metaphor of, you know, like if you have that brittle bone disease, I forget what it's called, but that one where, you know, if I accidentally bump my hand against the sharp edge of a table, I actually will break a bone or stub my toe. It's like there's a way where you become sensitized to where things are dangerous. Like things that are not dangerous to the rest of us actually are dangerous to that person, and nobody gets it. And I think there's a way where some of our folks really are so exquisitely emotionally vulnerable that they can't get it across to us. And our failure to understand that creates such isolation. So that's what I'm talking about treating here, if that is making sense to you. The secondary target. When you have a person who's like that, what do you do? So I would say you do a little mini treatment plan, formulation. I would say, I've been thinking about you, and it feels like there is this way, and then I will go ahead and describe the cues that seem to really set this off. When different cues that come up that, and I think often it's these ones that are like some situations, cues that bring to mind past humiliations where despite your best effort, you really messed it up and then lost, you know, something important, something that was humiliating, that sort of thing. When those types of cues come, like I say something in session or your partner says something to you, there's this certain way where you get swamped with this despair that you will always be this way, and it just pulls just like a black hole. And then I would say, and then it seems like the pattern goes like this. And so could we talk about how we could get that to go different? And hopefully I've explained it in a way that the person's nodding their head. I know exactly what you're talking about. I would so love that to go different, but actually emotion vulnerability is firing right now, and I don't think I can, you know, like that, okay? And then so I'd be specifying what are the replacement behaviors. So what you see here in the behavior rehearsal are the things that I would put on a typical, this is kind of like the Rolodex version, my little mini thing, I would be considering for each person, and then we'd select the ones that made most sense. The ones I want to just highlight since it's my shorthand for you is you really have to plan. If you're a person who has pervasive emotion dysregulation, you really have to plan for other people not getting it. Like other people, unless they happen to be like you, they really won't get it. And they will always have an opinion about what you should be able to do. And you kind of have to just plan for that. It's unfortunate, but that's how it is. And so all of the cope ahead stuff you can do there, including psychoeducation, like really teaching other people how to support you. Any of you who have chronic disease, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You have to really teach people like what your abilities are and why they are the way they are and stuff like that. And then the other, this one that says plan to retreat. The other one I really like to have people do is think ahead and let it be okay for them and for me. Often I'm thinking they can do more, but where we both understand there'll be times where they have to retreat in a planful way rather than let things, you know, go to hell. So heading off the inadvertent reinforcement of sort of the patterns that come with emotion vulnerability, and this kind of despair that comes on. That makes sense. And almost always people really have to increase their ability to be resilient in the face of invalidation and their own failures because of their emotions getting the best of them. And they have to really, really be good about being able to cope ahead and use their please skills so they've got a baseline of good stuff going. And then I've listed here some of the change procedures that I might use. So that makes sense? I know that was a super fast one, but again, like in the learning community, my sense is that most people's skills are such that they would get, like if these little shorthand phrases, they would get it, or we would have a chance to go back and forth over time to kind of flesh that out. So I've tried to weave in as much of the Q&A that I could, the questions that you guys asked, but if there are other questions that you guys want to see me answer, V1 and V5, thanks, Erin. That is shorthand for the coding system. So validation level 1, just being awake, listening, it's a certain type of validation. And V5 is where the therapist is actively communicating, finding and communicating why the current response makes sense. Not historically, but currently. And so that's the gist of that, right? Yeah. Other questions or thoughts you guys have? While you're typing those in, I'll just answer a couple that were kind of off of case formulation. There was a question from somebody about addiction. There is, how does DBT work with substance use? There's a really nice talk actually by Linda DeMeth on the PracticeGround site. Let me move to that slide just so you can see what I'm talking about. If you go to this PracticeGround, www.practiceground.org, Linda DeMeth has a really nice talk on DBT for substance use, and there's some good chapters out there. There's some preliminary data for DBT for addiction, so you might take a look at that. And then somebody else asked, what do you think about skills work as a standalone? You know, Linda DeMeth actually and I are doing a another little free thing, you know, kind of an open house for folks, because the other course that we're doing this fall is on skills training, and we're going to do a summary of the data, like what's the current literature. I would just say thumbnail briefly. There's some evidence that skills alone is useful, but alone, in the trials that I've seen, they always have some suicide management and some case management, and the therapist has support. So I don't know if it's skills alone really. It has some other components, but we'll summarize those data and share that. Okay. Other questions folks have? We should have a couple minutes here. Okay. Good. Just seeing mostly here thank yous and positives. Thank you. I'm hoping that was helpful. At least you may have gotten a taste test of what is going on in the learning community. You guys are very welcome to join. I did want to at least show you around, so to speak, sort of let folks who don't know me have a chance to see how I'm teaching, the kinds of things we're working on, stuff like that. Yeah. I want to stay on. We're coming up to the end here, so I don't want to keep those of you who need to get off and do your next thing. But if there are other questions that folks have, I will definitely stick around. And the other is I will send you guys out a couple of follow-on things, the link to the dissociative experiences questionnaire scale, and also the PDF that makes those mini treatment plans a little bit bigger, so you'll be able to see that. So, okay, at least a little taste test. Thanks you guys for coming. Hopefully it'll work for some of you to join, and obviously stay in touch. If there are any other questions, I should type you up my email here in case you want to ask me any questions. Kelly@ebpi.org is that. And I'll send you out a little follow-up email with some more content in case that will be helpful to you. And if I see any questions, the quickness with which you guys are texting right now, it's a little hard to see, but I will follow up with individual, save the chat here, and I'll follow up with you individually if I see a question. So I can get back to you about that if I missed it. Okay. All right, you guys, thanks again for coming. See you soon. Okay, bye-bye.